We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Donald Trump facing 91 felony counts across 4 indictments plus civil cases. Can he survive through to the election? Well, that's what we're going to examine today. All of Donald Trump's legal trials here on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. To kick off our litigation special, we're joined by none other than Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, a constitutional attorney, a well-dressed, dapper man about town, and host of the excellent Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott DeCosenza, Esquire. Welcome back to the show, Scott.
Thank you so much, Mark. My pleasure.
So I'm super excited about this one. We're going to be talking. New York. We're going to be talking Florida. We're going to be talking Washington D.C. And later on in the show, our superstar segment, we are going to be talking Georgia and Miss Fani Willis and the utter implosion of a Trump prosecution, which has just tickled me no end, just the ineptitude about that. But we'll be talking about that later in the show. But Scott, the one I want to start on is Jack Smith, Special Counsel Jack Smith, prosecuting Donald Trump in the District of Columbia, the nation's great capital city, district, let's call it, and how that case is going. Now, this week, we had the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals reject Donald Trump's claim of presidential immunity from this prosecution. Now, that was expected, wasn't it, Scott?
Oh, I think the smart money bet was that the D.C. panel would reject Trump's claim. It was a 3-judge panel populated by 2 Joe Biden appointees and 1 Herbert Walker Bush appointee. And I don't know anybody who thought that the 2 Biden judges would rule in favor of Trump. But
it did seem an unlikely push. However, yeah. So what everybody's kind of expecting now, and tell me if I got this wrong, all right, because I always like to be told I'm right, don't we all, is that Trump could either appeal that decision to the full DC Circuit Court, which I guess that's an en banc review, is it called? En banc? Or he could go straight for a Supreme Court appeal. Now, my guess is that he goes for the en banc one simply because it draws it all out. Is that right?
People who lose their case in the courts of appeals can go to the Supreme Court, or the way the courts of appeals work, as you say, or I think as I said, it was a 3-judge panel that reviewed this case, which is typical of appeals court, DC, which is typical of courts of appeals treatment from district courts. And then those appeals go to the Supreme Court. But in particularly noteworthy cases, namely cases which are called cases of first impression, which I think I told you about the other day, which is the case here. No appellate court has ruled on this case, and the Supreme Court hasn't spoken on it. Excuse me, I said this case, I meant this issue of presidential immunity from prosecution for acts committed, according to Donald Trump, in furtherance of the office of president. So it's incumbent upon appeals courts to use their en banc review when they're dealing with cases of first impression. That's in their own rules. So we expect that they would take it. And en banc just means as a whole, the whole body of the court, meaning all of, or at least most of, the serving judges on that court. I think it's 16, Mark. And as I understand the trend now, that senior judges often don't sit for en banc review. So it may be some less than the number 16. But in any case, lots of judges, including some that were appointed by President Trump, if that review happens. And then, yes, you're right. The reason why Trump might favor that, even if the result he expects would be the same, and I would expect, by the way, for him to lose during en banc review, because of the makeup of the court, is more liberal judges rather than conservative ones. But even still, it's going to take some time for them to hear the case. It's not like they just review the record. There would be another argument presentation, and as you might imagine, to get 16 people just to get all their emails returned and everything else is quite a feature compared to 3. So that would all accrue to Trump's benefit to delay. But in terms of getting a win, he's more likely to get that win at the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty much what I figured based on my extensive reading of Scott DeCosenza's writings on the pages of libertynation.com. I do recommend you go and check out his writing. It's full of in-depth information. You can sound as well informed as I am, dear listeners, perhaps more because you might even understand most of it. So, Scott, what
That's
this
the goal.
means, we should hope, what this
Yes.
means for the Donald Trump case in DC, the one being brought by Jack Smith. I believe the judge has already suspended the case until all of this presidential immunity question is settled. Is that right?
As soon as yes, that is right. The explanation for that is while the case was ongoing, during what's called this interlocutory appeal, an appeal that takes place not after the conclusion of a case, but during the case, all progress on that case was suspended. And then the actual trial date was the Super Tuesday Eve trial date was canceled. So that was the big win for Donald Trump, who we all presumes, his legal goal is, of course, not only to beat the case, but he doesn't need to beat the case if he can wait until after the November elections and win those elections. Then he doesn't have to worry about beating the case in court, presumably.
Yeah. So essentially, then nothing is going to happen with the DC case until and after a ruling eventually comes down from the Supreme Court, and we don't know when that
Well,
will
wait.
be.
Let's interrupt that train because that's
Sure.
not exactly true.
Okay.
The reason why it's not exactly true is because of a wrinkle in the ruling from the three-judge panel at the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which short-circuited the usual 90-day window for appeals to be taken to the Supreme Court. So what the judges said, and the very highly regarded conservative lawyer Jonathan Turley pointed this out on his Twitter, which is where I got it from, which is that the court said they have only until Monday the 12th, the Trump team, and to file their Supreme Court case. Now, they won't lose an appeal if they file after the 12th. It's not like you have until the 12th to do it or else you lose your appeal. They have until the 12th, and if they don't file it by then the Judge Chutkan in the D.C. Circuit Court, where the trial is going to be held, may resume progress in the case to getting to trial. So
Okay.
the smart money then, of course, expects that Donald Trump will, in fact, have filed that appeal by the 12th in order to stall any further proceedings in the district court.
It seems to me that I mean, I might be completely wrong here, but isn't that somewhat prejudicial to Donald Trump in terms of giving him the same rights that any other defendant would have in terms of the period between appeals? Because if it's the usual 90 days, but they've short-circuited that in their decision, that three-judge panel, isn't that? I mean, that seems a little unfair to Donald Trump that they would single him out.
I think a close and sober examination of all of the ongoing cases against Donald Trump yield a sense, Mark, that perhaps fairness to the defendant wasn't the primary purpose of engaging in the litigation.
I know I'm forever hearing the phrase justice delayed is justice denied. But by the same token, justice rushed is probably justice screwed over. I would guess. Now, Scott, we're going to be right back with Scott DeCosenza, continuing looking at Trump's legal travails. We'll be back talking the New York City cases against him. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.